Flybridge investment team. Flybridge is an early stage venture fund here based in New York. We've been investing now for over 21 years, having backed companies, amazing New York-based companies such as MongoDB. We are an AI-focused fund, both at the application layer and at the infrastructure layer. One of the things we've seen is that with the release of ChatGPT on late 2022, 2023 was kind of the year where companies were starting to test, demo with generative AI models, mainly large language models. And as we started to speak with the builders and operators this year, one of the common things we're starting to see is that 2024 is starting to become like the year where companies are transitioning to production. And that's amazing, but that's also bringing a series of general challenges as companies deploy. And we wanted to create a space with amazing builders, operators, experts who have gone through it, who are providing the tooling for that to share some of the common practices, challenges they face so that you can learn from those experiences. But before starting, I wanted to thank Sheree, our head of community at Flybridge, for helping us arrange this event. Also to the Portkey team, a proud Flybridge portfolio company. They will be sharing more of what they do later on, but they are an amazing observability and model gateway solution. You should definitely check their open source solution. And our amazing partners at Gunderson for providing this amazing space. So thank you all for coming, and I'll leave you with Aaron from Gunderson to share some words.
Hi, I'm Aaron Rubin. I'm a partner at Gunderson Detmer. We work exclusively with the leading venture-backed tech companies in the world and the funds that invest in them. So a lot of what we do right now is working with companies as they scale their AI products. This is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. I'm really excited about the panel that we have here today, and I want to thank Flybridge and Portkey for organizing this event. It's really exciting. I think we're going to talk about some great topics, and if anyone wants to chat about any legal concerns they have, they can always chat about that at a high level afterwards as well. So thanks very much.
All right, great. I'm Chip Hazard, founding partner of Flybridge. Been a venture capitalist since 94. Worked with Gunderson since '94. Best law firm around. They also have the nicest space. Their old offices we were just laughing about were not so nice. So be thankful they've upgraded. But thank you, Aaron, for hosting and for participating on the panel to bring your perspectives. What we're going to do today is sort of go a little bit through an arc of what does it mean to bring an LLM into production, what does it mean to bring an AI application into production, starting sort of customer backwards. And so the considerations will be both technical, but also business and security and privacy and everything that you need to be thinking about as you're building your applications and starting to implement early customers. And so I will be asking the questions, but the real talent is on the panel, and so maybe we'll just pass the mic, starting down at the end, and everyone give a quick introduction, and we'll go from there.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and thanks everyone in attendance. I'm Sarmad. I'm the co-founder CEO of Last Mile AI. Our fundamental premise is that software developers for the first time are building AI systems when they take off of generative AI. And the confidence that you need in production that has built up over decades with software development is breaking down because of these non-deterministic systems. And so we're trying to re-envision what the developer workflow should be that encompasses AI as another part of the software developer toolkit. So how you debug RAG applications, how you evaluate them, a bunch of the things that Portkey is also working on. That's pretty important for us to figure out as we get into the productionization flow for AI. Yeah, nice to meet everybody.
Hi everyone, I'm Yoni Sabag. I'm the COO and one of the co-founders of Noetica AI. We're an AI software platform that helps users analyze and benchmark deal terms in corporate debt transactions. I can go into a lot more detail, but I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Rohit. Ayush and I are the co-founders of Portkey AI. Super glad to have all of you here at the LLMs Record Meetup. Portkey is an AI gateway and observability suite combined into one. Think of us as the glue between an LLM application and the LLM world. giving you the reliability and the confidence to go from a POC to production. So deployed in over 100 companies now, and excited to share some of the learnings we've had over the last 3-4 years, building GenAI apps as well as helping others deploy GenAI apps.
My name is Chris Brown. I work over at NVIDIA. I help drive our startup ecosystem that we call Inception. Everything that we do on the startup side is really all about helping startups understand all the tools and supports that NVIDIA puts out there that have nothing to do with GPUs. So really it comes down to like software tools and models and libraries and things of that nature.
Again, Aaron Rubin, I'm a partner at Gunderson Network. I focus my practice on the day-to-day business of our clients. So negotiating partnership agreements, thinking about IP, privacy, strategy, basically everything that sort of converges when we're thinking about what a Gen AI-focused company needs to be focusing on from a legal aspect. So really excited to talk to everyone about what we've been thinking about with clients, and also Gunderson is a user of generative AI. We have a platform that we've rolled out with an agent that we have hundreds of attorneys using every day, and talk a little more about that app everywhere as well. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. So non-deterministic legal answers.
I was going to get into the disclaimer.
So
It's useful, I swear.
And we also at Flybridger built our own AI internal pipeline. Daniel's built. And so we can also talk as a user. Daniel can talk as a user. But so Yoni, maybe we'll start with you. So corporate debt transactions. The first thing I hear is that's got to be big companies. That's got to be a lot of lawyers involved. And you obviously drive a lot of the go-to-market. And so what are the questions you get from customers as they're thinking about AI? Do you lead with AI first? How do you help build trust? How do you address some of their concerns? What do you hear from customers? Love your perspectives from sort of the day-to-day interface with your customer environment.
Awesome. How long is this panel?
Yeah.
Okay, so set the stage real quickly. We do sell to right now some of the largest law firms in the world, and with that, they house incredibly private and sensitive data. Obviously, data that can move financial markets. With that, I'd say we see two challenges consistently: security and privacy, which you mentioned, and then generally performance. Performance, I don't really mean from the technical accuracy perspective. I actually refer to it as very plainly, can your product do what you say it can do, right? And that's actually like a really key point. A lot of people can show demos, POCs, but when a user is in there and is under the scrutiny of a very savvy attorney, does it deliver? And then on the security and privacy side, there are still widespread enterprise concerns around cloud, private data, who has eyes on your private data, and then something I'm sure everyone can appreciate here is training on private data. One of the things we think about is genuinely establishing a security posture that makes our customers comfortable. Things like SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, ISO, NIST, hiring a security team that can handle 800 questionnaires, of which every firm, Gunderson I'm sure included, has 400 plus questionnaires. It includes getting on the phone with clients and actually walking through your security architecture, and then basically handling some of the biggest concerns, which are end-party risk. So we actually house everything within our walls. No data leaves our walls, and we don't train on private data unless we're asked.
And on the performance question, obviously one of the challenges with AI is performance is often in the eyes of the beholder. And so how do you know that you're actually delivering on that performance promise to your customers?
So we built in an area that we have deep subject matter expertise. So we scrutinize our own output before it even reaches the hands of the customer. My CEO and co-founder is a former Wachtell attorney and drafted these credit agreements day in, day out for years. So we're running through a query. We actually know what to expect. We can provide feedback, and that loop is very tight to improve the models and actually see if he would use that in production.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the takeaways for me, at least from that, is that there's a huge benefit, obviously, in focus and being super deep in your domain. And so, generalizable takeaway, obviously, for people who are building in the room. And so, maybe switching while we stick with legal, Aaron, your customers, your clients are, day in and day out in that process. And so what are you seeing, what are you counseling them on when it comes to thinking about data issues, thinking about security issues, thinking about privacy issues, all the worries that you can be putting in their ear to make them nervous?
Yeah, well, we try not to make them too nervous, but that's exactly right. I mean, I think a lot of the points that Yoni mentioned are the points that we talk about with clients a lot. There's a renewed focus on what service providers are going to do with data. This focus on, are you going to use it to train your model or not, has been sort of the evergreen question over the last 9 months to a year that our clients' customers are asking them. Whereas I would say before that, in the typical SaaS agreement, it was really common to just have a provision that says, yeah, we'll use your data to provide services, and then we aggregate it and anonymize it to do all this other stuff, improve our products and other business purposes. And it got to the point where that was pretty standard, no one would really bat an eye. But all of a sudden, all these stories start coming out about Samsung and Amazon engineers did data leakage and OpenAI training on the models, and there's a very renewed focus not just from customers but also from our clients' prospective investors and acquirers as to how they're treating that data. So what we're working with them on is figuring out what do they actually need to do with this data, how do they make their customers comfortable with those needs, I think we're kind of settling on some market standards that are emerging. I think be interested in this panel's opinion on things, but I think in the B2B realm, it's becoming fairly common to just articulate what Yoni was articulating, that we don't need to take your data and train our models. Your data is secure with us, it's safe with us. It's not obviously what the standard is for a B2C client. There are very different data usage practices there, and what's acceptable in a free kind of B2C platform is very different than what, say, Gunderson or Martell or any law firm would be comfortable with where they sign up for that type of platform. So there's a little bit of testing out the market, but I think ultimately we're getting to a place where both service providers and customers are getting comfortable with how data is configured.
And so for many companies that are sort of focused on a vertical market, when they come and pitch us, they're saying, oh, we're going to improve the performance of our models over time. We're going to fine-tune models over time. But if you actually don't have access to your customers' data, how do you think about that?
Well, I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks about that as well, but I think it leads to another point that I'm seeing a lot of, which is an increasing number of licensing deals that we're doing where our clients are licensing really powerful data sets, not just publicly available stuff, which I think a lot of companies have scraped to death. But there's an emerging market of some really industry-specific, powerful data sets that are in demand, and that our clients are licensing, and they have kind of more free rein to improve upon and improve their models. That probably gives them some breathing room to not have to do that with their customers' data.
That makes sense. And so Chris, thinking about data and training, mind immediately goes to NVIDIA. I know you do more than that, but talk a little bit about just broadly how NVIDIA is engaging with the startup ecosystem, all the founders in the room, how they should think about you in ways that could potentially be part of Inception and partnering to solve some of the both business and technical challenges.
Sure. I always describe NVIDIA in a couple ways. One, or Inception specifically inside NVIDIA in a couple ways. One is as a navigator, because NVIDIA is a very weird organization that looking at it from the outside, you're like, who should I talk to about this or that? Because it's super flat, and as many of you heard, we don't have an org chart, so you can't just go like, hey, like this person goes up to here, and so I know that that's who I have to talk to. So we operate as a navigator for those startups that need to work with specific industries or specific technology groups where it's like, yeah, we have those relationships, we know how to tap into them, we know how to present what you're doing as a startup to those groups in ways that are going to be appealing to them. And then sort of secondarily, it's always about use cases for us. I as I described, to the folks as we were prepping for this, I don't have like sales, like our group doesn't sell things. Instead, we focus on what are you building as a startup, right? What is the thing that you're doing? Are you building something that is relies very heavily on computer vision or recommender systems or digital twins? Like all of those have different tools that NVIDIA has built, most of which startups probably haven't even heard about. Because NVIDIA is good at designing like the best chips. But we're less ideal at being able to be like, hey, by the way, we've got all these other amazing tools that you should be using. Like, you should accelerate your data science, and you should accelerate your recommender framework, and you should accelerate like your medical image analytics. Like, and we build stuff for that. And our job is really to be like, hey, all of this is available. So, a lot of it comes down to what are you as a startup doing? And then based on that, I have the ability to be like, oh, you should look at these like 5 different tools that are available to you. So that tends to be something where the more tools a startup uses, the more opportunities then open up with enterprises that want to engage with startups and say like, hey, like, do you have a relationship with Disney or with Walmart or with the federal government or all those things? It's like, well, of course we do. And those companies that we have sort of led down that path have all come through the like high technology engagement side of things. You mentioned a couple things around like that data side, and I think that like that's a huge one that we have seen. That enterprises, those areas where enterprises are still a little bit hesitant, that comes from they're like, yeah, we don't necessarily want our data going anywhere. We're not going to give it to Google, and we're not going to give it to Microsoft. And on that front, SDG or like synthetic data generation, that's been an area where more people have been trying to like dive into to figure out how do we build stuff here where I don't have all of this like existing proprietary data, but I want to build something out of it. And the other example is what we did with Getty, and this is now public, so we can talk about this. Getty, like their image group, like they worked with us. They licensed some stuff. We like gave them some stuff, and they used that to train their, effectively their stable diffusion model, like their mid-journey, right? Their image generation tool. And I think that's an area where a startup that has the ability almost just to be like a data outlet in some way, right? A startup whose entire focus is how do I find very unique data and then license it in a way that it's clean and usable, and then provide it in unique ways to enterprises. For those like enterprises that are terrified of like giving their data away to their biggest competitors, that is one of those avenues that I think we're going to see more and more startups trying to figure out how they can become these sort of unique providers of clean data that enterprises are more comfortable using than they would be necessarily with other enterprises. So startups might be in actually a special spot here.
That's awesome. We're going to have a little impromptu contest. If anyone can mid-journey, a prompt being sort of a panel discussing AI trends, AR.69/hyper-realistic, and the best one, free open office hours with Daniel. So no, that sounds great. So how many people in the audience are building applications with RAG being an important part of the technology stack? Almost amazing. The vast majority of the group. Good. Sorry. Yeah. Did I call on you? Our resident RAG expert. So we'd love to hear, given the breadth of your customer base and depth of your knowledge, what you're seeing in terms of both sort of best practices. Daniel wrote a great blog post on sort of naive RAG, relatively easy, complex RAG, relatively hard. And so what you're seeing in terms of both best practices and then issues and challenges you see people running into in the field.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm curious if folks resonate with some of this. What we're seeing is a lot of companies are building retrieval and recommender systems for the first time. It's almost like everybody's trying to build like a small search engine internally. And so the naive way works pretty well for demos, like you chunk some data, ingest it, transform it in some ways, put it in a vector DB, and then query it, give it a question. And then it breaks down if the question doesn't have the same text or something similar to it in the original data that came. And so there are all these edge cases that break down. But at the same time, there's utility in RAG, and that's why it's such a popular technique that people are doing. Ultimately, it boils down to I have data, I want to connect it to LLMs in a safe and systematic way and generate insights. And so the thing that we've really aligned on is internally at Last Mile is evaluation is the key to actually productionizing these systems. And evaluation is like an overloaded term, but the way I like to think about it is test-driven development. Right? Like when I do software development, I write a set of test cases first, and I want to see, does my system perform that in a reliable way? And it's deterministic in software, so it's a lot easier to do with unit tests and integration tests. But the same principle applies to LLM. So you could do hallucination detection, and you can have like 0 to 1 scale, and you maybe are okay with 85% faithfulness versus like a 75%. Answer relevance is another metric, and so you can have a series of evaluators that you define, and those are your test cases. You can define like test data that you test this on, test indexes that you ingest and transform, and you can, if you have small enough evaluators, then you can run this thousands of times every day, cheaply enough, and get a score and a dashboard for your application. And so what we're seeing is that's the thing that people are getting stuck on right now. And so it's pretty fast. Like you can call OpenAI's API and get started in a few hours. Maybe it takes 2 weeks to get a prototype out. But then to actually productionize that takes months today. And a lot of enterprises are still in that long tail of things they need to perfect. So it's hard, but I think a lot of these things will simplify over time, and we'll have patterns built out. And then people will no longer be inventing search engines from scratch. I think we'll have much better, reliable systems that people can then build on top of.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I sit on the board of MongoDB, so I'm going to put a plug in, use them as your vector database, because I would get thrown off the board if I didn't say that. And so on the embedding side, are you seeing customers moving to more sophisticated chunking strategies, leading to more sophisticated embedding strategies, or is that still sort of a little bit to be played for as they try to improve the accuracy when they start seeing their results in evaluations?
The number one question we get is, can you help me figure out a better chunking strategy or a chunk size? And what they're really saying is, my retrieval system has all these knobs, and I don't know how to change them in a way that improves or degrades the performance. And so it's kind of like shooting in the dark, So I think vector databases, embedding models, all of them are really essential pieces of the architecture. MongoDB, there are a whole bunch of others that provide that essential functionality. But then what we're also seeing is people already have data warehouses and other semantic search clusters, and so they're trying to hook into these different pieces of the system and trying to do almost like this hybrid retrieval across their disparate data sets, and that's really hard, really hard to get right. So it's a lot more complicated now. It's not just everything going into an embedding store, but that is a critical part of the stack. So I think that infrastructure is here to stay.
And one of the things we're hearing from people, and this may be part of what you're saying, running thousands of tests a day, but essentially using LLMs themselves to test the output, and are we able in somewhat of a more mechanized way to be able to identify where I'm performing and where I'm not?
Yeah, that's a great call out actually. So the current state of the art for evaluators is asking GPT-4 if GPT-4 did a good job. And it's, it works reasonably well, but it also, it's just not cost efficient to do this at scale. And that scale is what you need when you're testing. So one of the things we're really working on is, can you build small evaluator models that are not just LLMs, that you can vert-based encoder models that can detect hallucinations or detect answer relevance or have very specific targeted small models for targeted tasks, and then you can have a suite of them, and then you get a benchmark on your application. I think that's the future. A lot of folks are working on solving that problem. I do think ML is going to solve eval as a problem space, but I don't think asking GPT-4 to grade GPT-4 is gonna scale long term.
I was just thinking about that. I've seen a number of startups in the last, I would say, 3-4 months, who the entire premise of the startup is optimization of specific models, and then being able to, as opposed to spending all the money every time I do this, I've got to run a call. Instead, they're effectively trying to point to the right, so almost like a optimized model for that use case pointer, where it's oh, turns out Mistral is the right one you should be using here, so we're going to point for that without you ever seeing it. And I think more and more of that abstraction of having to engineer it is going to be a really critical piece. And this is when we're on the enterprise side, is going to make it infinitely easier for all of you as startups. And something I would I always recommend to startups, and I would strongly recommend, is the engineering is critical, right? And this is a more technical sort of conversation, but being able to sort of put what you're building in front of your customers in a way where they're like, yeah, this is super accessible to me. Like, I don't have to think about whether or not I've got the right engineering team to do this. So that if you can abstract away all of that functionality and just be like, no, this all, like, it all works perfectly. And like, we don't even talk about how it's like doing that behind the scenes. It's going to be a more and more critical thing, because most people are like, they see it and they're like, I've got to get a whole bunch of data scientists and engineers and all that. And that, all I hear is all the money going out the door, right? So like, that's something else to really keep in mind.
No, that sounds great. And so Rohit, thank you for co-hosting with us. You too have obviously a lot of customers, both direct customers and open source customers that are moving into production. I'd love to hear what you're hearing, A, in the field, and then B, you also have insights into the idea of thinking about different models and how one may over time think about routing or choosing different models. Love your insights on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so on the enterprise side, what we're seeing is all through last year, it was about POCs, testing stuff, testing models, and exactly getting in front of customers to just see what's working and what's not working. So people are just trying out a variety of different things. This year is when a lot of the enterprises are taking those POCs into production, and then production has its own varied challenges as well. In fact, you would almost see the change by the analyst questions that get asked in investor relation calls, because all through last year, analysts were asking questions like, so what's your AI strategy? I think this time it's become, what's your AI monetization strategy? And that change is driving a lot of enterprises to now worry about taking these POCs to production. And while a lot of people have done testing in sandboxed environments, everybody's now trying to figure out, how do I take this really nice POC which works here, and then deploy this to production without it becoming like a media nightmare or a PR nightmare for us. So I think that's becoming a large piece for enterprises. I think the GenAI native companies though, they've just taken this challenge on and they're building like crazy. It's the move fast and break things there, where it's a lot less worry about if it will work or not, but then is it a valuable enough problem to solve? So automating SDR calls, automating emails, automating customer support. And I think a lot of stuff is being built over here as well. Yeah.
So I would suspect this audience is probably less worried about the AI-based system giving away free flights and selling cars for $1.
Yeah.
What's the sort of the state of the art? I know you just came back from San Francisco. Like the best builders that you're seeing, what are some of the tools and techniques and approaches they're taking that is driving them forward in a really rapid way?
I think one, obviously, evaluations. And I think on production, we've seen evaluations move to more guardrails, which is, can I have these extremely small checks that are running on the input and the output, which is giving me continuous feedback on how things are moving in production. So you don't have to spend a lot of time testing stuff, but you can go into production a lot faster. So that's obviously becoming a really large thing. On fine-tuning, I think we were discussing this a little bit, but fine-tuning smaller models for specific tasks is also becoming a really large thing. So that's important because it improves accuracy, decreases cost, decreases latency. It's almost like an anomaly to the cap theorem in engineering, right? It's not supposed to do that, but with fine-tuning, with a really small set of examples, you get there much faster. So I think fine-tuning is the other, I would say model routing is something that's coming up. So we do that a little bit using our AI gateway, where you can have the same application connect to over 250 models and then figure out which one's working best for you. But I think that works a lot more in the experimentation phase. After a while in production, you've already sort of defined which tasks work best with which models. Yeah.
That's great. So a two-part question for the audience. How many people here are fine-tuning models? That's actually pretty good. And how many people are running ensembles and models in production? Oh, also pretty good. All right.
How many foundations? What's that? How many are trying foundations?
All right. Good. And so as you interact with customers, this can be anybody on the panel, who are either deep in the fine-tuning process or trying to run an ensemble approach to get the best model for a series of tasks in a row. Any thoughts or techniques you've seen work particularly well? And audience participation, welcome on this topic if you've solved these problems. We can bring you up on the panel.
Maybe I can just take a stab and then I'll pass it on. I think, so the model ensemble piece and agents are sort of, that line is going away, where you have agents who are doing classification tasks really fast and then figuring out which model to use for what use cases. So I think defining task-based fine-tunes and then routing those tasks to the specific fine-tunes is working really well. Also on-the-go fine-tuning, because you're getting more data in and you're getting human feedback also coming in saying, good agent, bad agent, how can you use that data to again keep fine-tuning the model in real time? Those are two things that we're seeing work really well in production, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say in production also, what we've seen at Favor Labs, which is where I'm at currently, is utilizing more and more concepts from like breakthroughs in broader areas of computer science, like category theory, to incorporate those concepts in LLMs to radically speed up and reduce latency. In other words, using research from areas immediately outside of traditional NLP. A classical example of that recently is like using creating composable LLMs, some concepts from like category theory to create these monadic LLMs. It's been really, really helpful for us in practice with our clients.
Awesome, thank you. I cold called you. That was pretty good. And one of the overarching themes I hear in some of these concepts is, again, you build this POC and it's great, but then as you think about production, it's slow, it's expensive, it's inaccurate, and so on the expensive side, any tips for again how you don't burn through a boatload of capital, running it all through OpenAI?
Well, we don't run through OpenAI, so that's one way to not burn capital and then get credits for AWS. Those are quick tips. No, you have to manage these things, and obviously, if you're deploying single instance or single tenant architectures, things can get pricey. But really, it's those two things. It's kind of in the early stages, Microsoft, all these folks are giving out credits. This is honestly my answer, and work to kind of improve your models, reduce costs before you get to the scalable stage, so that you're in a way it's all optimized. And then with that, quickly start taking in revenue to offset that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the way we're seeing enterprises kind of measure these costs, they usually have these spreadsheets of estimated token use for a particular use case and what model they're using or an option of models, and almost putting a dollar value before something goes live to even understand what's the cost that they expect, because they have to budget that in. The best way is actually, it's not a great answer, but it's to fine-tune your own smaller model for that specific task, because once you have the best, and most people start the POC with the best-in-class model, like a Claude 3 or GPT-4, get things working. But then the next step from there is you don't need all of the capabilities of these advanced models. So you could build a very specific model that's for that task works just as well. And you can use synthetic data, you can use all sorts of things to build that. But the issue is right now the capabilities are not there because these are software engineers building it, they're not ML experts. So I think the tooling needs to exist to make that super seamless. And it will, it's not there yet. But that's the simple answer. I think open source holds a lot of answers to reducing costs.
That's awesome. The sort of counterpoint to that is, so as the context windows get bigger, a lot of people are like, oh, maybe RAG is less important, or I can solve my hallucination issue with just a massive context window until they get the bill. And so how do you sort of think about the emergence towards these very large context windows and the impact that will have on how people build, and are they going to have to rebuild once they, get something working and realize that it's cost prohibitive?
Kind of related to both those. One of the things that we try to help startups understand, and we really tell them to lean into, is that the clouds might not be the sort of perfect solution. If you map it out sometimes, and I always say, like, we're Switzerland on this, because whether you buy it or whether you use it in the cloud, like you're using
your chip?
using GPU somewhere, man. But not enough startups actually look into, like, hey, maybe I should just, what if I don't even need an H100? What if I could just use like a smaller tier car that are now ludicrously powerful, like an L40 or something like that, and just use that and have it on-prem somewhere, and use that as our, like, yeah, we're constantly fine-tuning, especially if you're using smaller models, and you're just doing fine-tuning, and we can run that thing into the ground, and I don't have to worry about whether or not AWS has any capacity, like whether or not I can accidentally leave an instance on. It's essentially from that point just electricity. So like that's a calculation that when you think about, like, how do we minimize costs, something that you should step back and do and go, okay, how much am I going to spend on AWS, or how much have I been spending on AWS over the last 6 months? What was the actual compute that I got? Do we just need to buy something here? And like I said, like, it doesn't matter to us, because AWS already bought it, and if somebody else like uses it somewhere else, like, that's fine. But the just thinking about that part, because trying to train, like, nobody would ever train a foundation model on AWS. That would be insane, right? And if you're doing your own fine tuning, at a certain point, it's going to be more cost efficient to just like look at, like, all right, this is an Excel spreadsheet essentially, and if that ends up being like an advantage, like, that's actually a huge way to save money.
One of our great companies that Daniel and I met with in the last month was a founder who bought $20,000 of consumer grade GPUs, put them in his house, and fine-tuned the model to demonstrate a proof of concept. It all worked great until summertime when the house got too hot. So you can take that approach actually and get a little bit further than you would think.
Move to Scandinavia.
Run the geothermals to cool your different rooms. So on the end user side, talk a little bit about ChatGPT and what the end. I'm going now back to the customer side. What the end user experience has been like. How you all thought about rolling out and building trust and all the issues that are sort of the output of a lot of what we just talked about from a customer side.
Yeah. So we work in a really conservative vertical, the legal industry. There's a lot of hesitation to use something like a Gen AI tool when we're doing client work. But I think really we had to kind of work through a couple concepts. First was making sure, as we talked about earlier, the privacy security point was okay. That no one was going to trade on our data, that we could maintain privilege. That's another discussion for another time, but we got comfortable there. The second was just to make sure that folks were using this properly. We have a pretty simple but important usage policy that we've rolled out, which is really based off of 3 principles. One, make sure you verify and double check every single piece of output. 2, make sure that you know how to do what you're asking our agent to do. Because if you don't know how to do it, like, point 1 doesn't work. And then 3, make sure your supervising attorney knows that you're using this, because they might not think it's appropriate. But I think, and now we have hundreds of users using this at our firm. The really important thing, though, is not just the actual use of the platform, but the kind of purpose of, one of the big purposes of it was to get folks comfortable that this is going to be, this type of work is going to transform our industry. It's going to be how folks practice law and a ton of other professions in the future. And we need to get attorneys comfortable with doing this now. And so a lot of what we're doing with ChatGPT is changing mindsets, setting the stage for what's to come, and I think we've been really successful on that front as well, as more and more powerful legal AI tools are rolled out.
Awesome. And so I think in terms of the time of the panel, I think we'll switch to Q&A. So if there's questions from the audience, fire away. We can pass around the mic. Maybe you pass around the mic, Daniel, and Sheree. And Dre, if it's directed to one of the panelists, direct it, and if it's more general, I'll point.
Hi. For incredibly high confidence use cases like law or like financial transactions, you typically have to be using the most expensive, most capable models. There's been a lot of discussion on fine-tuning here on the panel today, but I think a lot of people would argue that fine-tuning a smaller model for something like law is not going to be as effective as GPT-4. What are the responses on using smaller models for use cases like that, and what do you think it looks like in the future?
I can't go into crazy detail about exactly what and how we built, but I'll say that we don't take the GPT approach to what we built, and we found that the product is much more functional and the performance is a lot higher. So we actually built everything in-house, take a multi-layered approach, combination of all kinds of models and then some, to get to the output that we want. We've run our queries through GPT before, utilizing that, and not only is it cost prohibitive, which we've discussed today, and there's a privacy component, but it's not the kind of thing, and we have a specific use case, obviously. That's what our whole thesis is at Noetica. The output just paled in comparison to what we were able to put together using a multi-layered approach. It's the reason that these complex transactions, we're talking like 300 to 500 page documents, nonlinear text, they've never been attempted before, with an off-the-shelf model. So our thesis is the exact opposite of just going for like the latest and greatest, data that leaves our walls kind of model, and we're actually very big on building in-house and going through an approach like that.
Our company also has experience collaborating with some bigger banks, so I can't really name and go into details, but I can tell you there's a bigger and bigger reliance, particularly in the banking industry and larger banks, to bringing a lot of these things on-prem, both for security reasons and also for reliability. And then internally what is done oftentimes is, instead of having scientists or teams of scientists work on building newer foundational models, scientists, we often have shifted focus to utilizing smaller open source models as base models, and then shifting the innovation on improving the kind of downstream LLM architecture that can be then used to fine tune up those models or build on top of them. So instead of, there's a shift in focus from building these foundational models to fine-tuning these models.
I saw a presentation the other day from a combination of OpenAI and Harvey, and so they took an opposite approach, which is they took OpenAI down to the studs and then they fine-tuned it up from there, and the time and cost is just, if you're anyone other than Harvey, like almost impossible. You'd much rather pick a domain, nail that domain with the approach of fine-tuning, with the approach of working closely with your customers in an on-prem environment with this ensemble approach, because otherwise it's literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that ends up being, for a lot of companies, obviously pretty cost prohibitive. Okay.
Hey guys, Ron, can you hear me? Okay. I'm in data analytics, which is also one of those fields where things just have to be correct. How do you guys get people comfortable with the correctness of AI products? I used to work in banking for a long time, so we dealt with a lot of human lawyers and human bankers who made tons of mistakes. But seemingly when it comes to AI, people have a much lower tolerance for this kind of stuff. So how do you get people comfortable with that? Without building a product that works 100% of the time, obviously.
I think what ChatGPT has done, so we were doing an AI-based content generation tool back in 2021, and I can tell you that the threshold for people to accept an AI answer was a lot lower then, because people would always compare it to a computer, saying a computer doesn't lie, it doesn't give you a wrong answer. What ChatGPT has done actually is it's brought down our threshold for hallucinations a lot more, because people are like, okay, this is an AI answer, and I can expect it to hallucinate a little bit. So it's always that, yeah, I'm going to try it, but I'm always going to verify it. So I think that mindset has shifted a little bit. That's one. But obviously, I think we talked about this a little bit, evaluations, guardrails. So during development, how you're evaluating your golden data sets, making sure that it works for the use cases that you intended for. And then in production, you have these automatic guardrails that are continuously running, and please telling you that, okay, I am, at some point in time, you need that visibility, right? So how accurate are you? I serve a right answer 70% of the times, and then it corroborates with the human feedback I get from a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So I think just bringing those metrics together makes sense. And this is something that Postman, they launched Postbot, and Postbot does it really well. So they're like, how can I capture user metrics, marry them with guardrails that we're running, and then check the accuracy of satisfaction.
And the answer is they don't have to be perfect. It all depends on the use case. Like the one I think we talked about, the thing is like the data that Klarna announced about what they did with their customer service bot. Like it probably wasn't perfect, but it doesn't matter. The amount of money that it saved and made them is ludicrous. So like it's all about what's good enough for a specific type of use case.
Yeah, and then the other thing we think a lot about is how do you, and you heard a little bit of this from Aaron, but how do you interface the AI with the human? And again, each application is going to have its own threshold of adequacy, and so in customer support, it's going to be lower. If you're making a medical diagnosis, it's going to be higher. And so within that use case, how do you build trust that I'm above that threshold of adequacy, and then have a way of interfacing with your users that they feel like they're in control, that they're reviewing, that they end up building a relationship with the AI in some way, shape, or form, and that's sort of built into the overall user experience in a way that it actually creates a much more symbiotic relationship is the other way to sort of work around that potential issue.
And sorry, just one really quick related point. In contractual negotiations, I'm seeing it really standard for like my Gen AI clients to put a small disclaimer in the contract saying, you know, that due to the nature of generative AI technology, nothing's 100% perfect, essentially, like that. The really interesting thing that I think is corroborated by what everyone's saying is I don't get a lot of pushback on that. I think everyone sort of expects that there's not going to be 100% perfection, and maybe in a couple of years that clause might be scrutinized a little more, but for now, it's becoming fairly standard.
Thank you.
Yeah, we basically just took the language that Google rolled out with Chrome, which was like, hey, this is experimental.
Yeah. You can find it all over, every platform has it, yeah.
So in the cybersecurity space, there's a concept of drift, where you're trying to find anomalies, right? And drift obviously drifts slightly. In the legal world, you can have a seismic change where legislation comes down, and what was true before when you first train your model suddenly becomes false. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I think you can generalize that outside of legal. Like, how do you incorporate real-time changing dynamic environments into models that maybe were good at one point in time, the models themselves drift? So I don't know down that end of what you all are seeing.
And I think that's actually more of a reason for the kind of techniques you're adopting, which is you do need models that are custom and certain for specific use cases, because a lot of that depends on the context that they're being used in. And so you're right, like you can't rely on GPT-4 because it was trained and cut at a certain point in time. So how do you refresh that with new information? RAG is one hack that people are using to get around that today. But the point you're bringing of model drift, that's like the standard ML thing, which is similar to cybersecurity, applies to the drift in data and context in this world. It's really hard to solve, and it's context dependent. But I think you need customization, and you need, similar to the previous question as well, like what is the user expectation? That's really critical to answer first. It's almost like a product question to start with, and then AI is like the means to the end for that. It's not the thing that people care about. They care about something fundamental. And so it's about like managing expectations a little bit too.
couple questions towards the back.
Hi there. So as a developer over the last couple months, there's been a lot of changes in terms of frameworks people are using around a lot of the tools out there. So I'm kind of curious about your views on the shifts in that space. More specifically, about this time last year, started experimenting with LangChain. Now there's other frameworks who are doing the same stuff. I'm using DSPy right now. Lots of other options. What does that look like as things move into prod, as people look to be able to have greater observability, greater capabilities more generally with these systems?
I'm going to have a super biased answer here, but I'll try to answer. So I would say this is exactly the same in every technology shift, right? You've got a lot of people building interesting applications, and every third month, because the technology itself is shifting, newer techniques come up, newer tools will come up. I'm sure 4 months back, nobody was talking about DSPy, and now DSPy is all the rage, right? Everybody's moving from, and then they're asking, can I use LangChain with DSPy, or do I not need to use LangChain? So I think this will go on for a while before standards sort of emerge on what you should do. In my mind, what's worked, not in my mind, I think what's worked for our customers is sort of defining the different areas of, for development, these are the requirements we have today, and we need tools for this. For CI/CD, these are the tools we need. For production, we need security, we need evaluations, we need this. So I think just breaking down the architecture and then designing the architecture helps you choose those tools a little bit better.
Yeah, plus one to that. And the thing I'll also say is the techniques are evolving very quickly. And so it's really important to keep up with what the latest trend is, but also expect that may be a fad, or it may evolve and become something different. And like Rohit said, it's really about what are we trying to accomplish. And for me, for example, when I keep talking about RAG, I really think it's about, I have data and I want to connect it to LLMs in some way. That concept is going to stay the same. That need is going to be there. But how you accomplish that is going to change. And so new frameworks will come in, new techniques for evaluating them will come in. But those fundamental building blocks are going to be needed.
We have time for 3 more questions. Just letting everyone know.
Just one quick comment on that last thing. What we see from a builder's perspective is this balance between you could try a new tool every day and you're never going to get anything done, or you can put your head in the sand and be building on LangChain and try to go to production, and it turns out it doesn't really work. And so finding that balance that works for you, works for your team, and having an open discussion around that we find operationally is super important.
So coming back to this, ChatGPT or OpenAI having this unique big brain model that you train for months and you have everything, versus smaller models with specifically and local trained data. How do you feel the future looks like? Will we get to a point where we'll have a single brain artificial general intelligence, or will we have zillions of smaller hyper-local intelligent agents somehow that will compete?
Pontificate.
I love this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super important one, and I think the answer is vague. You're of course going to have ultra specialized models that focus on specific industries and specific use cases, and just in the way that you have think about LexisNexis for legal searches, that will still exist. But Google also exists. I don't think this is an either thing. I think this is a both thing. So I would say very much that both of those are going to be critical going forward. I don't think that's a choice there.
Yeah, and I have a slightly controversial opinion here, which is I think we'll stop thinking about models as much as we do right now, because these applications that use AI will become more and more complex and sophisticated. And so you'll really be thinking about what they're enabling. And it's I don't think about how a website is hosted. Is it on AWS? Is it using Lambdas? Who cares, right? It's an infrastructure point. And so that's what, right now though, because it's such a public-facing thing, it's in vogue, and so we're all talking about the latest and greatest coming out. But I think it'll just become more complex in the workflows that are enabled, and so it'll just start thinking about what it enables instead.
Well, once it stops being the engineers who are leading the conversation, like honestly, like it's gonna have to make money at some point, and once like the engineers are no longer going, we should do it this way, it's like, no, like this is the way that makes money, and we'll just do that, and like we won't tell anybody, it doesn't matter. It's like, that's true.
Last question in the back.
So a few days ago, there was a clip that went viral on X where Sam Altman was saying there's only two types of companies, those that build on OpenAI and those that will get wiped out when OpenAI updates its model. Do you agree with that statement?
All right, it's over.
Everybody leave.
I think this, for me at least, the way we think about it is this analogy that was just made about the models they're in a race with each other for the highest performance. They're going to spend 200 billion to 800 billion to train the latest and greatest, and it's going to go like this. And eventually, all the builders in the room, you won't care. If it's the right tool for the right job, you're going to use it. If there's a specialized, you're going to use that. And I 100% would agree with what Storm is. It's all about the application you're building. It's the value you're creating for your customers. I don't think there's a world where OpenAI can just plug into Citibank and make magic happen. There's always going to be an application layer that's where the humans meet the AI. It's where the value's created, and the underlying infrastructure will be a huge enabler.
I'll think I interpret some statement a bit differently around builders maybe should not be focusing as much on things like doing, like let's say I'm a legal startup and I spend a bunch of my time focusing on how to extend the context window or doing faster inference, that time may be used better on like speaking with your customer, integrating deeply with that, and leave that other part of the model providers if you're more on the application layer portion. So I interpret that portion more on that side than the other. So it actually wouldn't replace you, it would make you better and save you time and resources.
Yeah, you should never think about your startup as a technology experiment. Your startup as a business, right? And so what tools you use in that business are tertiary or worst to like what you're actually able to do for customers.
Awesome. Well, join me in thanking the panelists. This was amazing.
We're just gonna do a little shuffling in the front and turn it over to Rohit for Portkey's first presentation.
Yeah.